Hi, I've just been checking out the new National Medical Training Survey and I wanted to give you 5 key takeaways from that survey. So the new Medical Training Survey is out from the Medical Board of Australia. It's released the findings of the first ever National Training Survey. And as someone who's previously championed and developed these types of reports in places like New South Wales, it's truly pleasing to see a report like this launched. And boy, did they release some findings with results of 59 headline questions reported across several different segments, including interns, pre-vocational and unaccredited trainees, international medical graduates, specialty trainees, with a main report running 249 pages, several other reports drilling down to college level, state and territory level, and even an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander report, as well as an online interactive dashboard and a page where you can customise your own reports. Really, there's truly something in it for everyone. And in this video, there's going to be something in it for everyone. So whether you're an intern or a trainee doctor or maybe an international medical graduate or even a specialist wanting to know a little bit about how training is working, I'd encourage you to check out the rest of this video. So what I'm going to do is give you my overall impressions and I'm going to focus in on 5 key areas that I thought were interesting in this report, starting right now. So the first interesting finding is that overall most trainee doctors in Australia are happy. And with all the negative stories associated with a lot of trainee doctors in Australia over the past few years, it might be tempting to conclude that trainee doctors in Australia are a deeply unhappy lot. However, that's simply not the case, at least according to the Medical Training Survey. And whilst those stories should never be ignored, and whilst there is empirical evidence of trainee doctors in Australia being exposed to adverse experiences in the workplace, in this survey, this experience is thankfully not the experience for the majority. In fact, 78% of the survey respondents indicated that they would recommend their current training position to another doctor. That's either agreed or strongly agreed. Followed closely by 76% of respondents being comfortable recommending their workplace as a place to train, again, to their other doctor colleagues. Now I get asked a lot by international doctors if Australian hospitals are good environments for international medical graduates. And what I find is interesting in this survey is there's some evidence that yes, they are. So here's a table that shows you that overall IMGs are actually even happier than interns about their training post and workplace. Overall, 82% of IMGs would recommend their training post to another doctor compared to 75% of interns, and 80% would recommend their workplace to another doctor, again, compared to 75% of interns. Next key finding is that doctors in training are still working too much. The survey shows that the majority of doctors in training are now working under 49 hours a week, but that's more than the average for most people full-time. However, 17% are in a risky area of working up to 59 hours a week, and there are concerning outliers, with 13% reporting working greater than 60 hours per week, including up to 90 hours or beyond. What is also interesting is that whilst one might expect that excessive work hours are more of a problem for trainee doctors further down the track of training, like a specialty trainee. Actually, when one compares the figures between, say, interns, that's the first year doctors, and specialty trainees, the difference is actually the other way around, with 16% of interns working over 60 hours a week and only 12% of specialty trainees working over 60 hours per week. But if we go a bit more granular and check out a specialty like surgery, we see more of what we expect to see. Here we see that 52% of RACS trainees, that's the College of Surgery, report working greater than 60 hours a week, with a significant number reporting over 90 hours a week. Now, if you spot another group that's worse than this on the survey, I'd really like to know about it. Also, only 47% of doctors in training report being paid for what's called unrostered overtime, which is a deep concern as well. Another interesting finding is that there are still too many doctors in training being exposed to bad behaviour. 22% of doctors in training in this report personal experience of either being bullied, harassed or discrimination, and 27% report witnessing something like this. This is on par with other reports conducted around the issue, including one I helped write a few years back. And similar to the study that I was involved in, this National Training Survey unfortunately found that only 35% of the recipients of a bad experience and 29% of the witnesses actually reported this behaviour, which again is consistent with other studies. But what is most worrying is the level of non-witness report, or what we call the bystander, as this is probably the key statistic to be focusing on here, because if we can work on the bystanders reporting, we might see some cultural change. Now, if there's a silver lining to all of this, it's this. 52% of recipients who reported bullying, harassment or discrimination actually received a follow-up to their report. Now 52% may not seem all that great, but this is actually a pretty good baseline result given what we know so far about the skills and capabilities of senior colleagues in handling what is a very difficult issue of dealing with a report of bullying, harassment or discrimination. Another key finding is that career aspirations greatly mismatch the reality. The medical training survey also included questions about career planning and intentions. For example, apparently 16% of interns were unsure whether they did or did not have a training plan. Now in my book that means you don't have a plan. But check out the next table here for an example of poor expectations management. According to another medical workforce data set, the Health Workforce Australia Medical Education and Training data set, there were 1,051 accredited surgical training positions in Australia in 2018. Now, bear in mind that these 1,000 plus positions aren't just occupied by an individual doctor for 1 year, but across several years in order to complete a training program. So the actual number of entry-level posts is probably around 200 to 300. Contrast this with the fact that 26% of the interns, resident medical officers, senior residents and unaccredited trainees in the National Training Survey indicated that they were most interested in pursuing surgery as a career. That's a raw number of 351 of the survey respondents alone. Now if we scaled it up to include those in these cohorts who did not participate in this survey, then we're probably talking close to 1,500 or 2,000 doctors when the true capacity is around 200 to 300 per year. If we look at the other end of the spectrum, we then see a specialty such as mine, which is psychiatry, which traditionally struggles to attract trainee doctors, and it's sitting at only 4%, which is pretty common, when in fact it has capacity for and needs more trainees than surgery. By the way, psychiatry also ranks in the top 5 professions for salary in Australia, along with surgery. Just saying, I'll leave a link to a video I made about that in the description and the show notes. Now I was disappointed to see that this particular question was not asked of international medical graduates. This would be important information to have, and it's certainly a question that I get asked a lot about. Final observation I would make is that we're not yet connecting the dots between medical school and doctors in training. You see, so my last key finding is really a non-finding. I was surprised to see that with all the effort that went into making this survey, getting it right, getting the question sets right, there was a failure to ask a really obvious question, which is about the transition from medical school to being a doctor in training. In the United Kingdom, in a similar medical training survey, they've been asking this question for a while, and arguably it's led to a change in the responsiveness between medical schools and the hospitals in terms of the sort of graduate outcomes that the medical schools are achieving. And this is an important issue as we need to ensure that the various parts of the medical training continuum are connecting with each other. What is even more surprising is that this question does actually get asked in Australia, and it is asked by the medical board as part of a survey that they participate in alongside the Australian Medical Council. But it's a separate survey called the Preparedness for Internships Survey, and it's done at a different time of the year. I believe this is a mistake, and it's a mistake not to include this question in the National Training Survey, as it helps us to connect some important dots with other questions. Hopefully over time the Medical Board will find a way of combining the results of both these surveys, or maybe rolling them together. So I'd encourage you to go and have a look at the survey yourself. I'll leave a link to how you can go to the survey in the description below. Play around with it and see what you find. I've only really scratched the surface over a couple of hours today, and in this post I haven't even touched on things like the differences between various states and territories, or issues around specialty training or other specific groups. So if there's a particular video you'd like to see me make around the medical training survey, I'd love to get your feedback, and hopefully we can do a follow-up video. And just a reminder, if you're watching this channel more than once or twice, I am the Career Doctor on YouTube, and I am here to help you with your medical career. Why not subscribe and turn on notifications? Love to hear some comments and feedback, leave them below. And if you're interested in any of my services, there's a link to our coaching and CV and courses in the description below as well. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.